Hi, I'm Tony Richards, and today we're going to go visit Dave Newell, the world's foremost Corvair authority. So join me, let's go. So I'm here at Dave Newell's Corvair Museum. Now, for our viewers that don't know Dave and I were a couple of kids 51 years ago this month. We started the San Francisco chapter of the Corvair Society of America. I think it was in February or March. Anyway, it was 51 years ago. And so Dave's going to talk about promotional models. And what we have today is the largest promotional model GM ever built. Right, Dave?
Largest promotional Corvair.
Largest promotional Corvair, okay. So why don't you explain to our viewers what a promotional model is?
Well, first I'd like to welcome everybody to my Corvair living room, as I call it. I live amongst Corvair memorabilia, and notice my shirt, which is a promotional for the Corvair clubs that the Chevrolet was going to offer in 1963 as a gift that you could buy through the dealer-sponsored Corvair clubs. And it's the only one known. It was a sample that I got from a GM retiree, but that's what I'm about, is Corvair and Chevrolet promotional items. And most of you are familiar with Corvair promotional models, 1/25th scale plastic models that you could buy at Chevy dealerships, or maybe if you're a good customer, they might even give you one. Well, today we're going to talk about larger promotional models. Larger than these, a lot bigger, and the very first one that Chevrolet made. Speaking of Corvair promotional models, this is Bill Mitchell, who became General Motors Vice President of Styling in 1959, took over from Harley Earl, and he's responsible for overseeing the design of the Corvair, which was actually done by Ned Nichols underneath Bill. But this is Bill with the Styling Award from the Industrial Designers Institute for the Corvair for its design. And the promo we're going to talk about tonight, the promotional model, the largest one that General Motors ever made, Bill was responsible for it. It would never have happened without Bill Mitchell. Most of you probably know about the Monza SS concept car that was introduced in 1963. It was built at GM Styling for Chevrolet. Before it, the Monza GT made its debut in 1962. And this is a Japanese magazine, which was typical because these cars received publicity all over the world. General Motors took them on tour of all the European auto shows in 1963. They created a sensation. All the young people, especially in Europe, wanted to buy one of these cars. And they received so much publicity. And they became very well known, and they still exist today. General Motors takes excellent care of them. Now this is the promotional model that we're here to talk about tonight. And this is the first Monza Junior, which was hand-built at General Motors Styling, courtesy of Bill Mitchell. And the way it happened was that Bill Mitchell wanted to build a small kiddie car, a replica car of probably a Bugatti from the 30s or a Mercedes for his stepson Tony. He wanted him to follow in his footsteps and have gasoline in his veins like Bill did. So he talked to Larry Shinoda, who was the head of his experimental design studio, Studio X, and Larry suggested, well, why don't we make a miniature of the Monza SS, and then Chevy can give away copies of it at auto shows, like they'd been doing with miniature Corvettes, and the development and design of the car for Tony won't cost us anything. Because they're always concerned about getting audited for projects being hidden within other projects. So they had to be careful about money for personal projects. So it became actually a Chevrolet project. And this is in the styling yard at General Motors Styling when the first Monza Junior was completed. And this is Larry Shinoda, head of Studio X. He was Bill's pet, designed the Astro 1 and the Corvette 63 Corvette Stingray, Mako Shark, Sebring Spider, Super Spider, you name it. He's a fantastic designer. And he's posing with the car. And what happened was that Larry had raced go-karts, and quite often just across the road from the GM Tech Center in the parking lot on weekends they had go-kart races. So he told Bill, well, I'll sell you my racing chassis and we can have Styling here build a body replica of the Monza SS to go on it. So Larry did a clay model of the Monza Junior, and he's posing here with it, adjusting the West Bend 2-cycle Power B engine that was in his racing cart. And General Motors did it up, chromed everything, and I'll show you how it turned out. Here's a beauty shot of the Monza Junior. This again is number 1. It's entirely hand built at GM Styling, the only one that had this plexiglass windshield. All the emblems and moldings were custom made at GM Styling just for it. It's upholstered in leather with gauges, it's carpeted, and pretty fast. It would do 50 miles an hour with that West Bend engine. So since he was making the car for Tony, his stepson, he kept it under wraps at Styling, and he hoped to give it to him on his birthday, but they couldn't quite finish it in time. So they decided, well, we'll put it in the Chevrolet exhibit at the New York International Automobile Show in April of 1964. And it had its own display. It was in the Corvair area of the New York Auto Show, as you'll see. Here it is. It had a mahogany railing around it. It's custom display, and this is Tony Mitchell standing by the car, looking it over on the day they presented it to him. It was press day at the show, so there weren't a lot of crowds. And you can see the Corvair in the background. And then we'll show you Bill Mitchell at the show presenting the car to Tony. And he loved it. He would take it to the Tech Center and drive it on the experimental test track on weekends at the Tech Center. It was a little finicky with that engine. It was pretty high powered for a go-kart. But he loved the car, and so much so that they decided they would take it to the June Sprint races in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. And what they did, for several years, Bill had taken GM concept cars to Elkhart Lake, and they'd run them in a parade lap before the actual race started. And they would set up a tent with GM show cars in it and get sports car enthusiasts' opinions of their latest creations. So from the New York show, the next event for it was at Elkhart Lake, and this is the parade lap of the Monza Junior with Tony driving it with his special custom red helmet to match the car. Behind it, in the Monza SS, Bill Mitchell, here's Vice President of Styling, driving the Monza SS, and Larry Shinoda with his brush-cut hairdo, doing 8mm movies of Tony driving the car. And then Bill's wife is in the Monza GT following it, and way in the background is the Corvette Shark, the first of the Shark series. But that was the parade lap that year. We never have found the film, though, that Larry was shooting. And in December, of course, at GM Styling, it was routine to host VIPs, Air Force generals, Pininfarina, head of Pininfarina in Italy, any number of celebrities, movie stars would visit GM Styling, and they would usually bring out show cars for them to play with and look at. And in December, just before Christmas, who should visit GM Styling but Sterling Moss, the racing driver. And here you see Tony, who had just made his appearance, driving in with that raucous engine exhaust from the Monza Junior with his little red cap on, and Sterling Moss standing in the background, and Bill Mitchell over here way in the back, which was unusual for him to be behind the scenes like that. But he was so proud of Tony, and he'd hoped that Tony would carry on in his footsteps as a total car motorhead. Sterling really enjoyed the car, and he and Bill drove the Monza GT. Even though it was snowing out, Sterling was really interested in all the show cars. And you can see Tony's little red helmet with the car, and that was really his day to debut the Monza Junior with Sterling Moss. The following year, Chevrolet Show and Display, that designed and built all of Chevy's auto show exhibits and was responsible for giveaway prizes for auto show attendees, they modified the original mold for the Monza Junior, made it easier for an adult to sit in it if they wanted to, changed the body quite a bit from the original prototype. And by the summer of '65, the giveaway cars were ready, and they were also called Monza Juniors, but they were much more basic, with a Tecumseh lawnmower engine, 5 horsepower lawnmower engine, and no windshield, very basic. The first Junior had gauges in it that worked. It was carpeted with leather upholstery, and this car, the production car, just used a basic Rupp Go-Kart chassis. And they used Rupp because Larry Shinoda was a pal of Mickey Rupp. They were down in Mansfield, Ohio, and Mickey Rupp had driven race cars at Indianapolis, both at the kart track and big cars at Indy, and Larry had pit crewed for him, so they were good friends. And Larry's racing chassis that they put under Monza Junior #1 was a Rupp. So it was natural that Chevrolet got with Rupp and worked a deal to where Rupp would actually build the production giveaway karts. They farmed out the fiberglass body, but the chassis was all Rupp. It was what they called the dart cart chassis. And all told, they built about 5,000 of them, including the different iterations. Then in '67, of course, the Corvair was being downplayed in '67, and there wasn't. They didn't want to promote the Corvair any longer, especially with the Camaro coming out. So they changed the name of the Monza Junior to Chevy Junior, and they painted them marina blue with white bumblebee stripes on the front and the back. And you see here is a promotional photo. They still had the lawnmower engine. They were still basically the same car, but just blue, and now they were Chevy Juniors instead of Monza Juniors. They continued that until 1973, when they changed to orange. They were still called Chevy Juniors, but now they were painted Hugger orange with the same type of bumblebee stripes. And this is a Rupp brochure, because after the first year, Rupp was allowed to sell them themselves through their dealers. And they not only made go-karts, but they made snowmobiles and mini bikes. But all told, there was about 5,000 Juniors made. But that was 1975, I believe, was the last year that they gave them away at auto shows. And then they switched to a Vega, of all things. Now, if you want more information about Monza Juniors, I was privileged to write the history of Monza Juniors, including #1 and all the production cars, for the Corvair Society of America for their magazine, the Corsa Communique. And there's articles were done in two parts. The first was in the February 2018 issue. That's this issue. Followed in March by part 2. And part 2 has Joey Chitwood Monza Juniors and the high performance ones that show and display built for the sales convention in 1966. I urge you, if you're interested in Monza Juniors, I think you really should read these articles, because I put a lot of work into them, and I think it pretty much tells the whole Monza Junior story. Now, lately, I've been doing a series of articles with never before published production figures of Corvair options. We've done one issue of 1969, one issue of 1968, and the deadline for 67 is just a few days from now, but this is the 68 issue, and I highly recommend the Corvair Society of America and their magazine. And if you live in Northern California, by all means join San Francisco Bay Area chapter, which Tony Richards and I founded in 1972. So there's a very brief history of the Monza Junior, and I really appreciate you watching.
So Dave, that was a nice presentation you did. There's more to it than I ever imagined. When can we see the car?
Well, Tony, I think we need to go in the other room.
Okay.
Well, here we are, Tony, and I think it's up to you to do the honors.
Alrighty. Ta-da!
All right.
Look at that.
Well, as you can see, the best place to keep a Corvair promotional model is right in the centerpiece of your display. And this is number 1, hand-built at General Motors Styling.
Number 1 of 1, right?
Number 1 of 1.
Only one of a kind.
One of a kind. They did build a second one with a production body that had a similar windshield for Mark Jordan, the son of Chuck Jordan, who was Bill Mitchell's director of design. But it wasn't anywhere near as fancy as this. It used the stock chassis. But everything on this car is hand-built. All the emblems are chrome-plated brass, custom-made just for this car. The windshield moldings. The windshield is unique, hand-formed out of plexiglass at GM Styling. The upholstery is leather with a teak steering wheel, custom-made just for this Junior. Gauges, full instrumentation, leather upholstery, carpeted, even with removable panels to fill the air gap between the body and the chassis. The wheels are larger than on production Monza Juniors. They're replicas of the Pontiac Grand Prix wheel, which Larry Shinoda also designed when he was in the Pontiac studio. The hubcaps are machined out of aluminum and attached with an O-ring. I wouldn't want to go racing with it, with hubcaps like that. But the body, of course, was formed off of a clay model that was made in Larry's studio at GM Styling. And the emblems, they called it the Monza SS Junior originally. But then when they went into production, with the production carts, they were simply the Monza Junior. Well, this is the interior of Monza Junior number 1. Start with the teak steering wheel, custom made just for this car, with the horn button with the Monza emblem. The gauges are unique to this car. It has an on-off switch here, toggle switch. It's fully carpeted with special panels handmade to cover the gap between the floor and the body itself. They bolt on. Carpet on the floor, padded leather upholstery on both sides of the body. There's a Rupp serial plate on this side. Leather seat. And behind it, this is the back of the gas tank here. The headrest was very difficult to mold on the production cars. The very first production cars used a headrest like this, but it was so hard to get out of the mold that they, after the first few cars, they changed the mold to where this was all flat through here. But this car was actually a tighter fit. Adults wouldn't fit in it as easily as the production car. That's why they changed the body with the production car and made it easier for us larger folk to get into. And also the angle here is totally different on the production cars. And the body on this car goes way under, virtually back to the tires. The production body is cut out, which makes it easier to take on and off. Now the engine is a 2-cycle West Bend Power B with double Tillotson carburetors with velocity stacks, all chromed and black crinkle painted by GM Styling. It originally had a megaphone exhaust, which a friend of mine is going to recreate. You have to take it off in order to take the body off. And the person I got it from, they took the body off and put it up in the rafters so that they wouldn't get damaged. And in the meantime, they lost the exhaust, but we're making a new one. Speaking of that, forgot to mention when we were showing the pictures, is that in 1966, Tony Mitchell fell off the water tower in Birmingham, Michigan, and met his untimely end, and Bill Mitchell was beside himself. After that, he could not even look at this car because it was so traumatic to him. So he gave it to a fellow named Kenny Eschebach, who was one of the crews that maintained and modified concept cars for GM Styling, because he had a son, Richard, and Bill Mitchell knew that Richard would appreciate it. So he gave it to Kenny, and then Kenny, like I said, hung the body up from the rafters in his garage, where it stayed from 1966-67 until 2003, when Kenny and his son allowed me to buy it, and I've treasured it ever since, and try to remember Tony every time that I dust it off, and Bill Mitchell for creating it for us all. And thank you for watching our video, and I hope that you'll read the Course Communique and look up my back issues and read the history, and thank you very much.
Well, thanks for showing us the car, Dave. I think it's wonderful. Definitely one of a kind museum piece you got here. You know, so I can appreciate it. It's the only one like it, and all the ones that followed were not cheap knockoffs by comparison. You know, this had numerous hours went into creating this. You know, so I think it's wonderful. So thanks again for letting us come over and take a look.
My pleasure, Tony. When are you going to buy a Monza Junior?